Throughout my career, one of the common sentiments I've noticed from peers is a desire to be autonomous. This means many different things to many people at varying degrees, especially within a professional context. What is informed autonomy then? To me, it's a squad's ability to manage their full stack, an ability to reason across the full set of components for a system, and having the data to back it up. And this often is something that it sounds very simple and very easy to accomplish, but it doesn't necessarily work out that way. And so what I want to do today is to talk a bit about what this means for Deputy and how we've come about applying it, and what are some of the key takeaways that I would recommend or like to share for each of you. And really, informed autonomy then is just having the right tools to be able to make the right decisions so that squads and groups of people can be self-sufficient. By the end of my talk, my aim is to leave you with an approach to an engineering team structure that can scale further with minimal headaches by putting together a strong foundation. With the concepts I'll cover, their context and outcomes, I'll leave you with some ideas on things that you can incorporate into your own teams. To begin with, I'll give you some background on Deputy. We are a cross-device platform to provide various workforce capabilities to manage businesses such as timesheeting and rostering. We provide a range of apps for mobile and tablet devices and give a lot of flexibility for the usage of our platform depending on circumstance and requirements. Such things as touchless clock-in and the standard browser experiences are tailored to the different devices depending on the specific requirements for individual businesses. For the touchless clock-in, for instance, this is really useful in current circumstances where we need to be diligent with our hygiene and the way that we interact with shared equipment. So not having to touch a rostering system means that there's less likely going to be any sort of infection or other issue around hygiene. Our product development is organized into cross-functional squads. Our ways of working are generally shared, so each group of people will follow the same processes and execute in a similar fashion. Not all squads are the same, and these squads are generally semi-long-lived. For these squads, though, they at least are made up of a product manager, a designer, a tech lead, and then one or more engineers. And these engineers are of various different disciplines. So we might have a squad that has 3 or 4 mobile engineers and maybe a backend engineer. So that sort of squad would look after a lot of mobile device work and a lot of functionality related to the devices, but they might also make or contribute or look at bugs in APIs with the backend engineer. And so this might seem familiar for some people. It's somewhat loosely based off the Spotify model, or at least for me, it makes me think of the Spotify model. We do things a little bit differently though. We don't follow the exact same structure. So we don't have this concept of tribes, nor the concept of chapters or guilds. It's primarily just the squads that we focus on. For those discipline-based groups, we still have our concept of teams. And so engineers typically fit in a squad and then their team, which is discipline-based. And so that way there's still like a head of mobile, or like the mobile engineer who leads the team, but they don't necessarily manage their mobile engineers day to day. They work within the squad. And that way we have this sort of tight-knit group of the cross-functional style, which can be autonomous, but we still have individuals who are thinking about the long-term strategy and focus for that particular engineering discipline. For the systems team then, we sit within this, but also outside of this structure. We don't work within the squads themselves, but we provide more of a service to those squads to help them be as autonomous as possible and giving them the foundations that they need to be able to move. One of our traditional responsibilities is the infrastructure side of things. And so this might lead you to think, well, wouldn't we just be the infrastructure team? And that makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't really capture everything that we do, nor what our core focus is. And of course, infrastructure is a big focus because without it, we don't really have a platform anymore. And so really it's like, okay, we're not just the infrastructure team. So we need to think about something different. I mean, there's a lot of operational complexity that goes into all of this. So we should capture that as well. And so what about ops? And even from that point, what about DevOps? And they're great for this type of purpose, but they also don't quite capture the sentiment nor the ideal outcome that we're after, especially with like DevOps being more of a conceptual idea rather than an actual implementation. And so really not ops. It doesn't quite feel right. And there's a lot more around the long-term strategy and planning rather than pure operational concern. And so really, I think that's where we arrive at the systems label, because we are able to capture all of those things plus everything else. So as the systems team, then we really look after quite a lot of stuff. We have our standard infrastructure and operations, as well as the tooling and experience that goes along with this. Primarily the developer experience is one thing that we have picked up by circumstance. And really, I feel like this is a great way for us to channel our energy into driving more autonomy back across the squads. And really beyond the infrastructure and the operations, we have all of these other stuff that we do. Everything from incident management and the underlying networking, plus the preparation for scaling and how we handle the cost as we do that scale. And for the informed autonomy, we really want to have this as something that the squads themselves can manage. And that way they can each be truly independent and not have to come to the systems team to accomplish these things. In a big way, this is really similar to how some SRE functions work. And I think there's a lot of crossover there, but it doesn't quite fit for us to be SRE in that sense. And so the systems label really is the most appropriate for the way that we are approaching these situations. And informed autonomy then is really the big driver behind all of these things. And when a squad is able to manage each of these pieces themselves, then they can actually be autonomous rather than just moving in their own direction at their own pace and not necessarily concerning themselves with things like operational complexity. Our squads themselves are already autonomous and have been for some time, and heavily that's because they have this cross-functional representation, especially from the leadership side with the product manager, the designer, and the tech lead. There's enough people in that squad then to be able to make decisions, There's no big concern around making changes to the areas of the product that they manage, because they have the context and the knowledge readily available, and they don't need to worry about consulting all these people across various departments and whatever it might be. And really then the informed component is adding some guardrails to that autonomy to help keep focus and making sure that all the squads are still aligned across the board. And so then it's sort of a why for the desire to be autonomous. And in a big way, it's more around like the way that humans desire to work, and for the way that our squads are assembled and the way that they feel the most capable to carry out their work is to have as little like a micromanagement almost as possible. And so with the guardrails that we are able to put in place as to drive the informed autonomy, this frees up those squads to be able to move and to do what they need, and they don't feel like they're being held back or told what to do. So with the cross-functional nature, there's this ability to make any sorts of changes that they need to solve the product challenges that they face. And the ability to do all of this really drives empowerment across the individuals within the squads, and they generate their own sense of accomplishment as they carry out their work. It really drives a benefit from this sort of empowered, positive feeling that gets felt through the entire business. We can move quicker, we can make functional adjustments without having to have meeting after meeting after meeting to plan and make sure everyone is across the changes that are happening. One of the barriers to moving through some of the informed autonomy changes comes down to the self-governance and ownership perspectives. This was one of the big challenges that deputies faced as we've been moving towards a more informed autonomous approach, and the issues around ownership. Deputies been around for so long, or a little over a decade now, and the platform has evolved relatively rapidly, and there hasn't been much time that's been provided to go back and improve and bring a lot of modernization across some of the original features that we provided to our customers. And so from this, it means that squads don't necessarily own those components of the platform. And so when something breaks, or when things slow down, or we need to make some changes, it can be difficult to find the right squads to tackle those problems. And so really the first barrier we had was to find owners for those components, and to make sure that for each of the squads, they have ownership over their particular components, and that way they can tailor their perspectives around those subject areas. One of the other foundational components is related to the visibility and access side of things. Primarily, the visibility side is the monitoring and the logging and the tooling that goes along with those things. Because really, without any sort of visibility, it's just unknown what's happening. You don't know whether your components are functional. You don't know that any integrations you're working are actually succeeding. You just don't have any data to really understand the current state. So the major barrier to the self-governance side is just to be able to see what's happening and gathering data and then generating some useful information from that data. The access was another piece that's tricky to work with, and that's heavily because we can't, or we don't necessarily want to just open up all of our components to every individual and say give everybody root access to AWS accounts. That's pretty dangerous, and it sort of would defeat some of the governance purposes from outside the squad's perspective. And so the tooling that we heavily focus on is around providing the capabilities that you might traditionally use AWS console or the CLI for, but doing it in a way that's more tailored to our platform and the components that we run and how we work as a technical organization. Informed autonomy then is taking all of these things and using them in certain ways. So gathering all of that data and helping you make decisions with the data points that you've collected. The biggest example of this would come down to error rates from the SRE world. So measuring requests, HTTP requests, and looking at how often they succeed and how often they fail, and generating SLOs off the back of that. A squad is able to see that their APIs might be, say, underperforming, or there might be some downstream problems, or even just bugs in their code. And so when it comes time to plan or grooming backlogs or anything as a part of the squad work, this data can feed in to help determine whether or not, say, a sprint should focus on bug fixing, or whether everything is fine and they can proceed with feature development. And really, that's kind of the core driver of all of this, is having a really good understanding of the current state of play to then make decisions. And from the systems perspective, what we really want to do is shift the focal point of the responsibility for some of these things that we do onto the squads themselves. And that is really just a big driver of more autonomy across more of the platform. So not only would it be to managing the stack themselves, it's also then looking after the current availability and reliability across those components. There's always going to be things that systems will need to take care of, especially the sort of cross-component glue work, but allowing squads to contribute and work within the systems that we provide will allow the systems team to really make more comprehensive changes with minimal impact to the squads themselves. And one thing that sort of is driven out of the informed autonomy is this concept of feedback systems. And really, it's just a technical version of what the squad would do with an informed autonomous approach. It's about generating data and feeding it into some sort of tooling or framework that then either makes decisions or generates outcomes or anything like that. A great example of this type of thing would be around having triggers run when certain monitors notice that particular metric values change in a certain way. We might notice that the CPU is really high on a fleet of compute instances, so we would add more compute to better handle the load. And so we get this sort of looping happening. We have some visibility in place that generates some metric data, events get triggered from that, and we generate more feedback off the action of those events. And so we see this sort of self-healing, self-relying system that is born off the back of an autonomous approach from the cross-functional squads. A good example here comes down to, say, auto-scaling groups. And that's really driven from the sort of technical challenges that are sort of commonplace across just standard technical teams. One of the big challenges that we face within the systems team is around helping the squads understand the sorts of data that they're working with. So as systems engineers, we generally have a good amount of experience in working with monitoring systems and tooling and all of the data that goes with it. And so we've kind of built up this knowledge of what particular metrics mean and how we can work with those metrics. And so providing the tooling sort of only gets the squads to a particular point. There's still a little bit more that needs to happen. And so the systems team then becomes a little bit more of a internal consultancy and a bit of a service provider, really. So we provide the squads with the tools to be able to work with all the data and generate all of the points, but then we also provide the training and the like a run book almost of the sorts of things that can be done with the data that's being gathered. And this way, we aren't just throwing all of our squads into the deep end of like, here's a bunch of stuff, make sense of it. We give them more help to make sure that they also don't misinterpret the data that they get. And this sort of builds more confidence and allows for just a smoother transition and also a greater degree of confidence in the long term of being able to move forward without any sort of hand-holding or gatekeeping from the systems team ourselves. One of the other sort of things that comes off the back of having all of this data then is not just this sort of automation around system management. One of the other really big focuses with the informed autonomy approach is around using the data in bigger ways, or sort of even more human ways. So having the right data being generated and then interpreted, we can apply these points to bigger things like the goals that a squad has. So we know that goals, that goals that are being put together for squads are typically product focused, and that makes a lot of sense. But when there are goals that might be around increasing conversion rates or decreasing time to wait for customers as they're trying to, say, sign up or whatever it might be, we can use some of the data points that are taken from these feedback loops to actually compute the goal values for that squad. So we can use, say, SLOs as a way to measure the time it takes for a customer to fully onboard. And so a squad is then able to say, okay, we have a baseline for the onboarding experience. It's currently X minutes. We want to drop that by 30 seconds. And so with these data points and all of this tooling that goes into place, the squad is able to actually measure this, and then they can hold themselves accountable. And it becomes a sort of a full circle of like building the functionality, getting the visibility on the functionality, and then using the data from that to really sort of hold yourself accountable and feel accomplished when things are working very, very well. The accountability then is born off the back of this. So not only do squads feel empowered and capable, they measure, and that way they know that things are actually working the way that they believe that it works. And the accountability here is around knowing that by doing a good job or by fixing those bugs, there's actual tangible outcomes that can be measured and monitored. And the really sort of big impact from this is knowing that for some of these particular scenarios, like customer wait time, it's tangible to put yourselves into the shoes of the customer to experience that. And for me, this is something that helped me understand some of the product side of the way that we work, and sort of knowing that not only do we have these goals that are or would traditionally appear to be purely product focused, we now have a way for the technical side of the business to help inform those data points and like really make sure that everything is actually the way that we believe it is. It was interesting when I was preparing for this presentation. I was due to give a dry run, and I was on call that week. And the day before I had the dry run scheduled, I was woken up at 2 a.m. and it was for one of the platform components that we don't have a big ownership for just at the moment. And so I was awake until 4 a.m. trying to find out what was going wrong. And for all of the visibility that I had, it made no sense. And things looked fine. Nothing had changed. And so there was nothing I could do at the time. And there was nobody that I could really call to find out more about what was going on. And so I went back to bed. I was tired. I was trying to prepare for my dry run, and it was a bit of a harrowing experience. And so with the ownership concepts and with the accountability, with the informed autonomy, the idea is that like the systems team, we don't necessarily know how all of these components work across the full platform. Really, the people that know how these things work are the squads. They built them or they maintain them, and they're the most across how they actually function on a day-to-day basis. So it makes a lot more sense for the squads then to manage those. And for systems, we would manage more on this internal platform of visibility and access and just capability to fully manage and sort of build upon the platform components that we already have. And the squads can then do these things in their own pace, in their own way, and with minimal sort of hand-holding or gatekeeping from any of the teams, such as the systems team. We don't want to stop the squads from doing what they need to do, and we don't want to have to individually do things for each of those squads. It's just not a way that can scale very well, certainly not quickly. And so informed autonomy is all about using data to work smarter. And for our cross-functional squads, it's best shown as our way of utilizing metrics gathered from across our platform to generate meaningful data. This data is useful from both the business and technical aspects, driving goals and key objectives, but also the day-to-day work that is picked up. From the concepts of error rates all the way through to sort of the perceived performance by customers, teams are able to readily self-manage and truly be autonomous in the way that they carry out their work.